I vividly remember being in Bloomington, Indiana, for the Second World Brass Congress hosted at Indiana University by Harvey Phillips during the late spring of 1984. Like the first World Brass Congress of 1976 in Montreux, Switzerland, the IU meeting brought together many of the world's best and most famous brass artists. One of the evening concerts was by the Scandinavian Brass Ensemble, a group of 17 brass and percussion players plus conductor. It consisted of soloists and principal chair orchestra players from Finland, Norway, and Sweden. The group was stunning. After the concert, I was excited to meet the members of this all-star ensemble. I knew several of them, but talked mostly with my friend Michael Lind, founder of the group and principal tuba of the Stockholm Philharmonic. I was surprised to learn that the group was put together very quickly and was to exist for only about a week. They had a few rehearsals in Stockholm, recorded music on an album, and then came to the U.S. to play a concert at Northwestern University before coming to IU. I was flabbergasted that the ensemble played so well in such a short time. With members from all over Scandinavia, it seemed impossible that they could blend and match styles so well. Then I remembered the famous Gabrielli recording with brass section members from the Philadelphia, Chicago, and Cleveland orchestras, which Bud Herseth once told me was done in one day. Later that night, my head was spinning with ideas about forming an American all-star large brass ensemble. The next day, I met with my colleagues of the St. Louis Brass Quintet to discuss the idea of forming such a group. Alan Dean, Larry Strebe, Mel Jernigan, and Dan Perantoni each thought I was crazy, but they loved the concept. We talked about who we should invite to join us in this new, currently nameless ensemble. We wanted people who were top performers and teachers, as well as persons who were easy to work with and were young enough to handle touring and the rigors of growing a newly formed ensemble's reputation. Many of the people we wanted to invite to the group were attending the Brass Congress, so we met with Ray Mace and Tony Plogue on trumpet, Gail Williams, David Crable, and Tom Bacon on horn, trombonist Ralph Sauer, Mark Lawrence, and Joe Alessi, and Gene Picorni on tuba. For conductor, we picked Carl Topolo. It didn't take long for the group to fill out. Everyone we asked said yes immediately. Selecting a name for the ensemble was not as easy, but while watching the television news one evening about President Reagan having a summit meeting with Soviet leader Gorbachev, the name Summit Brass seemed to be a perfect one. Everyone liked the name, so it stuck. Before we could legally incorporate, we needed to form an executive board of directors. We asked Harvey Phillips if he would serve as board chairman and help us attract others with the fundraising, business, legal, and media connections we needed. Before long, we had a board consisting of a certified public accountant, an attorney, a professional arts fundraiser, music store owner, and numerous brass enthusiasts who were successful business people. Harvey also included a few of the initial artist members who became the officers, me as president, Larry Strebe as vice president, Mel Jernigan as secretary, and Dan Perantoni as treasurer. Altogether, there were 14 on the executive board. Harvey also formed an advisory board consisting of some of the giants in the music world, including Doc Severinsen, Adolf Herseth, Philip Farkas, Robert King, Arnold Jacobs, Gunther Schuller, Leonard Slatkin, Armando Gatalla, Robert Giardinelli, Clark Terry, Gerald Inslee, Charles Gorham, Tasso Harris, and Don Whitaker, many of whom are now deceased. Summit Brass wanted to hold an annual Teaching and Performance Institute, initially to be 2 weeks long, that would serve as the core of our scope and goals. It would also provide the basis for tuition income and grant application funding needed to get us off the ground. Most board members contributed money for startup costs such as incorporating fees, advertising materials, magazine ads, travel, music library, and office materials. We thought that a summer institute would be best because it would not conflict too much with students' schooling or faculty performance commitments. I always loved Colorado in the summer, so I began looking for a place in the mountains where we could hold a 2-week institute. An executive board member, Barbara Shackley, who was an attorney in Denver, agreed to file incorporation papers in Colorado since our institute would likely be there, and also because 3 of the 14 board members lived in Denver. So we became a Colorado nonprofit corporation in 1985. Soon after that, Barb filled out an application with the Internal Revenue Service for Summit Brass to become tax exempt. This process took several months and was approved by IRS later that year. We also registered the trade name Summit Brass Inc. with the U.S. Patent Office. In talking with executive board member and CPA Bernard Etter from St. Louis, I asked for his thoughts about finding a place in Colorado for the Institute. He told me that he was the accountant who did the tax reporting for the Keystone Resort in Keystone, Colorado, and that he knew that the resort was looking for ways to bolster their summer income when the skiing season was down. Keystone was about an hour due west of Denver on Interstate 70, so it was easy to get to. He gave me the name and phone number of Jerry Jones, president of the Keystone Resort. Later that afternoon, I called the number Etter had given me, expecting to reach one of the resort's administrative secretaries. I was shocked when I heard a voice say, "Hello, Jerry Jones." I took a huge breath and laid out as much information about Summit Brass as possible without stopping for air. I figured that if I paused for a second, he would probably interrupt saying, "No, thank you." After I quickly explained how Summit Brass wanted to hold a 2-week institute for around 150 young professional music students with public concerts most every evening, his reply was, "That sounds great, but can't it go all summer?" Jones loved the idea, and we talked about how it might expand in the future. He invited me to come there for a meeting and to see what facilities the resort had to offer. Well, our meeting went very well, and the executive board approved holding the first Keystone Brass Institute in 1986. We invited the National Repertory Orchestra, conducted by Carl Topolo, to come up from nearby Evergreen, Colorado, to perform 2 concerts during the first Keystone Brass Institute, with several Summit Brass members as soloists. The following week, Summit Brass and the NRO split a concert in Denver with Doc Severinsen as soloist with each group. It was held at Red Rocks Amphitheater and was funded and promoted by KCFR FM radio in Denver. We performed for approximately 7,500 people. To get the most mileage out of what we knew would be a hugely successful concert, we invited a half-dozen concert presenters from cities around the country to fly to Denver to be there. We paid for their flights, rental cars, hotel suites, and provided them with prime seats during the concert extravaganza. After the concert, we even held a private reception for them with Doc and Summit Brass. Some Summit Brass members thought it was crazy to spend so much money on these concert presenters, but Summit bass trombonist Mel Jernigan, our new booking agent who owned and operated Primo Concerts in St. Louis, knew that he would be able to solicit most, if not all of these presenters, to book Summit Brass for tour concerts. He also hoped that they would tell other presenters about Summit Brass, which they did. Because of this, we were able to form tours starting a year later, taking us to prestigious concert halls in Texarkana, Texas, Austin, Texas, Kirksville, Missouri, Columbia, Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri, Evanston, Illinois, Fulton, Missouri, Denton, Texas, Joplin, Missouri, Flat River, Missouri, Chicago, Illinois, Carbondale, Illinois, Bryan, Texas, Maryville, Missouri, Branson, Missouri, Macomb, Illinois, Columbia, South Carolina, Belleville, Illinois, and a few other places. The day after the big concert at Red Rocks Amphitheater, Summit Brass recorded its first CD, with Doc Severinsen as soloist. We rented a school auditorium in Denver and recorded for the Pro Arte label out of Minneapolis. An executive and an engineer from Pro Arte flew to Denver to oversee the recording. We felt lucky at the time to find any label willing to take a chance on a new ensemble, and the CD was a success. Our first CD was titled Episodes and featured Doc Severinsen as their soloist in Alan Vizzuti and Jeff Tysick's 5 episodes for trumpet and brass. Other pieces on the album were Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man, Herbert Hofrecht's Symphony for Brass and Timpani, Music of America arranged by Wayne Scott, selections from Bernstein's Mass arranged by Gordon Hallberg, and John Cheatham's Commemorative Fanfare. Because our board chairman, Harvey Phillips, was an associate editor for the Instrumentalist magazine, he arranged for Summit Brass to be featured on the cover of the September 1986 issue with a multi-page article about the group and our institute. This helped launch our reputation. The next year, after our second Keystone Brass Institute, Pro Arte recorded another CD for us in Denver. Steve Vining, the label's president, was on hand, and he boasted about how the first CD sold over 60,000 copies in the 6 months it had been out for sale. Naturally, I asked when Summit Brass would be receiving its first royalty check. He said soon, but I had my doubts. Repertoire for this second CD included Fanfare for La Paris by Dukas, Ceremonial Fanfare by Copland, Presto Barbaro by Bernstein, selections from the American Brass Band Journal by Friedrich, a Gershwin Fantasy arranged by Wayne Scott, Festmusik der Stadt Wien by Strauss, and Alfred Reed's Symphony for Brass and Percussion. As we prepared for hosting our third Keystone Brass Institute in Colorado, Vining called me to discuss repertoire for a third album. I told him that we wanted to record a Renaissance and Baroque CD with works by Gabrieli, Bach, and others. Well, he was thinking of an album of brass arrangements of popular movie music such as Star Wars, Superman, Batman, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and so forth. I told him that we did not have the time or money to get the arrangements made, and that it seemed like that should be a project down the road. But he insisted. At that point, I asked if we could get our current royalties for the first album, which by now had been out for almost a year. We were to get $1 off of each CD sold, but he all of a sudden told me that sales were very low. He couldn't pay anything at that time. I told him to check with his accounting department to see where we stood and that I would call him back in a week. As expected, I received the runaround. Our conversation quickly turned hostile, and I told him that we would no longer be recording for Pro Arte. The next day, I called the executive directors of 3 major orchestras that Pro Arte had recorded to find out if they were receiving royalties from the label. Each said no. I then asked if they would be interested in going in on a class action lawsuit against the label, but they declined, stating that if the word got out that their orchestras were troublemakers, no other label would touch them. As it turned out, I discovered that Pro Arte never pays anyone. I then called the presidents of several major record companies to see if they might be interested in recording Summit Brass. Although each initially showed interest in us, they were reluctant to take on a brass ensemble if they already had a brass group or prominent brass soloist. I was not able to strike a deal. In talking to Summit trombonist Ralph Sauer from the Los Angeles Philharmonic, he suggested that we start our own label. He could oversee disc replication and CD booklet artwork and printing there, and I could handle sales and distribution. By this time, 1988, Summit Brass had a small paid staff, and I thought that advertising and shipping our CDs could become part of the staff's duties. The executive board approved forming the Summit Records label, which at first was simply under the Summit Brass umbrella. We recorded the Renaissance Baroque CD in Denver immediately after the 1988 Institute and released the CD a few months later. It was Summit Records' first release. Soon, several members of Summit Brass asked about recording solo albums for Summit Records, and the catalog started to grow. After releasing a half dozen or so different CDs, the executive board became worried about Summit Records sales because it was owned and operated by the nonprofit and tax-exempt corporation Summit Brass. Barbara Shackley, the attorney on our board, suggested that Summit Records be set up as a totally separate for-profit corporation, but with the same board members as Summit Brass. In order for Summit Brass to be able to receive some of the profits from sales, each recording contract was to be with Summit Brass. Then Summit Brass would license each recording to Summit Records. Although this seemed a bit complicated, it was legal. Summit Brass was the owner of Summit Records and received money by licensing all recordings to Summit Records. Summit Records released 9 recordings in 1988. It was split off as a separate corporation in 1989. By 1996, just 7 years later, Summit Records had released 125 different classical and jazz recordings and grossed a little over $500,000 in sales that year. Licensing fees provided Summit Brass with much needed income to support tours and its annual institute. The Keystone Institute continued through 1992, making a total of 7 two-week seminars at the Keystone Resort. We loved our years there because of the beautiful scenery, luxury facilities, and vacation-like housing. As it turned out, the National Repertory Orchestra liked playing in Keystone so much that it made a move there for the last 6 years of our 7. Thus, the Keystone Music Festival became a 12-week summer program, with the Institute being the first 2 and the NRO being the last 10. Over 1,000 students attended the Institute in Keystone, and Summit Brass presented hundreds of master classes, career seminars, private lessons, concerts, and ensemble coachings. Summit Brass recorded several more CDs during those years, including an all Hindemith double CD that consisted of all of the brass sonatas, the music for piano, brass, and 2 harps, sonata for 4 horns, and Morgan music. This was done in 1989. In 1990, we recorded a CD titled Colors for Brass, music of Anthony Plogue, which includes his music for brass octet, concerto for trumpet and brass ensemble, 4 sketches for brass quintet, many variations on Amazing Grace, and animal ditties. I think this album helped spark Tony's interest in becoming a full-time composer. Immediately following the 1991 Institute in Keystone, Summit Brass recorded a CD of newer works titled American Tribute. It included Castle Creek Fanfare by Dan Welcher, Keystone Celebration by John Cheatham, Reflections on a Dance by David Sampson, Moon Dance for 4 tubas by John Stevens, Sonneries by Donald Erb, and Gunther Schuler's Symphony for Brass and Percussion. Gunther was a guest at the Institute that year, so he conducted this piece in concert and recording. Carl Topolo conducted the other pieces. During the summer of 1992, our last year in Keystone, Summit recorded a CD titled Delights. Repertoire included Overture for the Royal Fireworks by Handel, arranged by Ralph Sauer, Suite from West Side Story by Bernstein, arranged by Eric Kries, Water Music by Handel, arranged by Sauer, two movements from Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, arranged by Howarth, Battle Galliard by Scheidt, arranged by Ray Mace, Mockingbird Quickstep by Ripley, arranged by Mace, and Arizona Quickstep by John Stratton, also arranged by Mace. Because of new management in Keystone and their push to raise profits for the resort, some 60 or so nonprofit organizations that work with them, including the Special Olympics, were no longer to receive discounted pricing for food, housing, and use of facilities. The cost became too much for us, and the Summit Brass Executive Board voted to find a new location for the annual institute. Nearly all of the other nonprofits left Keystone too, including the NRO. It was really sad. Board member Bernard Etter told me that the reason for the management change was because the owner of the resort, Ralston Purina, wanted to sell it to a huge Japanese firm that would use it as a vacation toy. But after all of the turmoil from resort budget cuts causing nonprofits to leave, it turned out that the resort was not sold after all. Well, life moves on. I've often wondered how the resort is doing these days and if they are in need of a summer music festival. 1993 was a very important year for Summit Brass. One of my doctoral trumpet students at Arizona State University, Del Lyron, wanted to write a full biography on the famous Hollywood trumpeter Rafael Mendes. Although I had known Rafael a little bit personally, he had died back in 1981. So I contacted his twin sons, Rafael Jr. and Robert, then prominent urologists in Los Angeles, to see if they would be willing to work with Del on the project. They agreed, and Del and I met with them in their father's home in Encino, where their mother Moore was still living. After a full day of interviews and seeing all of Rafael's instruments, music, awards, and other memorabilia, The twins told us that their mother was in very bad shape and would likely pass away soon. They said that the home would be sold after that. Naturally, I asked what was to happen to all of Raphael's things, enough to fill a small library. They said that they were hoping to establish a Rafael Mendez library somewhere, but had not yet found a suitable place. As it turned out, the university where I was teaching had recently expanded its music building, almost doubling its size. I offered to inquire with my music director, Dr. George Umberson, about finding space for such a library, and they were interested in that possibility. The next day I met with George. He loved the idea and showed me a large space in the music building that might work. It looked great to me, so I invited the Mendez sons to fly to Phoenix and see the facilities and to meet Dr. Emerson. Everything worked out, so Dell and I and a couple more graduate trumpet students rented a large truck to move tons of materials for the library. The official ceremony for the opening of the Rafael Mendez Library was on June 11, 1993. In connection with supporting the library and lifetime use of the space, the Mendez family made a sizable donation to the School of Music. Since Summit Brass was looking for a new home for the Institute, I proposed that the Institute's name be changed to the Rafael Mendez Brass Institute and that it be held at ASU. Dr. Emerson and the Mendez family agreed. The 1993 and 1994 institutes were held at ASU. During this time, Summit Brass registered as an Arizona corporation, dropping its Colorado corporation status. Immediately after the 1994 Mendez Institute, Summit Brass flew to Kentucky to play a concert at the Great American Brass Band Festival in Danville. It was a fun time. Everyone in the small town dressed up like it was the year 1900, and dozens of well-known brass groups performed that week. We were the finale concert, which was recorded for PBS television. I'll never forget that atmosphere of excitement and humidity. With the summer heat and large lighting racks for television taping, I doubt that any of us had ever sweated so much. I remember us taking off our tuxedo coats backstage after the concert, dropping them on our dressing room tables, and hearing them splat with perspiration. The following day in Danville, we recorded another album for Summit Records called Paving the Way, which included Tomasi's Fanfares Liturgique, Holst Mars from the Planets, arranged by Ralph Sauer, Symphony in Brass by Eric Iwaisen, Concertino, Opus 94 by Shostakovich, arranged by Kenneth Singleton, Variations on America by Charles Ives, arranged by Carl Topolo, and Hoedown from Rodeo by Copeland, arranged by Topolo. It was recorded in the Norton Center at Center College. As usual, our recording engineer was Sonny Osmond from Los Angeles. Summit Brass did many tours during the late 1980s and 1990s. Mel Jernigan applied for numerous touring grants from state and regional arts councils, as well as the National Endowment for the Arts. Sometimes this grant funding paid 10 to 80% of our concert fees, depending on where the concerts were held. I've never known of any booking management to apply for grants like this, so our hats are off to Mel for doing such a great job and working so tirelessly all those years. Touring was fun, but much of our travel was by charter bus. It was tiring, but we did our best to entertain ourselves. We also enjoyed playing large and small cities across the country. At times, it was a shock to play one night in a small town college auditorium with 500 or 600 people in the audience, only to be followed the next night by playing in Chicago's Orchestra Hall for 3,000 people, with famous brass players like Bud Herseth, Arnold Jacobs, Philip Farkas, Charlie Vernon, and Jay Friedman in the front row of the balcony. Nothing like pressure. Many of these dignitaries of the brass world were on our advisory board, and we enjoyed having dinner and drinks with them after the concerts. Summit Brass hosted the 1995 International Brass Fest at Indiana University in Bloomington. Although a huge artistic success, it lost about $60,000. We decided to host another Brass Fest the next year, this time at Cal State University Long Beach. Even though we kept to a tight budget, 1996 also lost money, approximately $40,000. Being on the West Coast, it just couldn't draw enough people from the eastern side of the country. Although annual deficits were nothing new to Summit Brass, we were now in serious financial trouble with an accumulated deficit of about $100,000. So during the 1996 Executive Board meeting, it was decided that Summit Records would be sold to pay off our debts. It was the only asset we had worth a lot of money. My mother, Dorothy Hickman, was on the board, and she offered to purchase Summit Records at fair market value. She promised to keep the same staff and operate the company as before, but Summit Brass would have to agree to relinquish all of its recording lease contracts. This meant that Summit Brass would no longer receive any licensing funds from the record company. Wanting to keep the record label close and not wanting to sell it to a huge record conglomerate for fear that the label would be broken into pieces, the board agreed. When my mother died in 1998, I inherited the company. But just over a year later, I divorced my first wife and needed to sell the company to two of the executives at Summit Records, Darby Christensen, Director of Sales, and Christopher Sullivan, the Chief Financial Officer. For the 22 years since then, Darby and Kip have released hundreds more recordings, making Summit Records a viable and well-respected label. It is still in Arizona and has always served the music community by releasing high-quality recordings by top-notch artists while paying honest royalties to producers, artists, and investors. Plans for 1997 were to return to Tempe, Arizona for our regular Rafael Mendez Brass Institute, which we did. It was a success. After the Institute, Summit Brass recorded another CD for Summit Records called Spirits of Fire. This album included Suite from the Opera The Perfect Fool by Holst, arranged by Jay Friedman, Mutations from Bach by Samuel Barber, Symphony for Brass Opus 80 by Jan Cotier, The Summit Concertant by Andrei Lazarev, O Vos Omnes by Pablo Casals, and Tony Ploug's Scherzo. Our conductor that year was Paul Lustig Dunkel. The summer heat in Arizona was problematic in attracting as many students as we wanted. So we started looking for a different location, one with a milder climate. Tim Northcutt, a former ASU graduate tuba student who worked for Summit Brass and Summit Records for a year or so, had recently become the tuba professor at the Cincinnati Conservatory. He made a proposal to Summit Brass to host the RMBI there starting in 1998. Our executive board approved, so the Mendes Institute was moved there for the next 4 years. Tim did an excellent job, but decided that it was necessary for him to devote more time to his family and finishing his DMA degree. Again, we looked for a new location. 1998 was also the year of our European tour. As a soloist, I had professional booking management in Philadelphia called Joanne Ryle Artist Management, which started for me in 1978. She booked me over 2,000 solo appearances with bands and orchestras in the U.S., but she did not have the connections to book her artists in other countries. So I was also able to become a soloist for concerts in Europe through Concert Direction Schlatte out of Salzburg, Austria. The head of the company was Joachim Schlatte. He booked several hundred solo appearances for me with orchestras and was interested in bringing Summit Brass to Europe. However, without touring grants to help support Summit Brass concert fees, plus the large expense of travel from America, he was only able to book one 2-week tour for us. Although all of the Summit players had been to Europe several times as soloists, chamber musicians, or orchestra players, I think we will always remember this tour as being a lot of fun. We were treated like celebrities. Like I mentioned earlier, our institute was forced to leave Cincinnati after the 2001 institute. Without finding a suitable spot in 2002, no institute was held that year. Fortunately, I received a proposal from Dr. William Stanley, trombone professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder, to host the 2003 RMBI. Having received my bachelor's degree at CU back in 1972, I was very familiar with the school's facilities and beautiful summer climate. The board approved the move to Boulder. Boulder was a great place for the Institute. We recorded our 8th CD in Mackey Auditorium as a live concert album simply called Summit Brass Live. One of the pieces we recorded was Eric Owazin's Symphony in Brass, our second recording of this piece. He was our guest composer that summer. Other works include a Western fanfare by Owazin, Little Fugue in G minor by Bach, arranged by Michael Allen, Air from Orchestral Suite No. 3 by Bach, also arranged by Allen, Doina Fantasy by Don Elam, featuring hornist Tom Bacon, 4 Preludes, Opus 34 by Shostakovich, arranged by Brian Burkle, Prism, Shards of Color for Brass and Percussion by Alan Vizzuti, that featured soloists Vizzuti, Gail Williams, Larry Zalkin, Brian Bowman, and Dan Parentoni, and the Vienna Philharmonic Fanfare by Strauss. also held the 2004 RMBI at CU. Again, Bill Stanley did an excellent job, but he was not receiving the kind of support he needed from his school. After 2 summers in Boulder, the Institute was in need of finding a new home, hopefully a permanent site. My good friend Alan Hood, professor of trumpet at the University of Denver, called to ask about hosting the Institute in 2005, along with his wife Jennifer. The director of DU's Lamont School of Music was also a trumpeter, Joseph Doxey, who gave full cooperation. DU had recently opened a spectacular new music facility inside the Newman Center for the Performing Arts, and the location was perfect. Al and Jennifer hosted the RMBI quite successfully for 7 years. Each year seemed to get better. During the finale concert of the 2008 Mendes Institute, Summit Brass recorded its 9th CD. This live concert recording featured guest jazz trumpeter Bobby Shue and Tom Kubis's arrangement of But Beautiful, and tubist Daniel Parentoni in Manny Album's 3-movement La Brasserie. Other works were Summit Fanfare by Plogue, Capriole Suite by Peter Warlock, arranged by Jay Lichtman, Alborada del Gracioso by Ravel, arranged by Michael Allen, the trumpet trio Gaito by Rafael Mendes, Jazzalogue No. 1 by Joseph Turin, Fanfare der Stadt Wien by Strauss, and a spectacular arrangement of Joseph Krine's Pines of the Appian Way from Respighi's Pines of Rome, which featured over 100 offstage brass participants from the Institute. This CD is titled A Summit Brass Night in Colorado and is on the Summit Records label. Beginning in 2012, the Institute has been hosted at DU in conjunction with the Denver Brass, with Kathleen Brentigan, Joseph Martin, and Becky Wilkins as administrators. Now a well-oiled machine, the Rafael Mendez Brass Institute has seemingly found a permanent home in Denver. 2021 marks our 17th year at DU, although this and last year's institutes have been virtual ones due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Recent faculty for the Institute include John Marciando, Joe Bergstaller, Chris Coletti, Ronald Rahm, Alan Hood, David Hickman, Aline Hackelman, Thomas Bacon, Susan McCullough, J.D. Shaw, Denise Tryon, Martin Hackelman, David Bird Morrow, Carl Lenthy, Scott Hartman, Richard Harris, Brad Edwards, Larry Zalkin, John Lofton, Brian Bowman, Demondre Thurman, Joseph Martin, Daniel Parentoni, Timothy Northcutt, Kathleen Brentigan, Warren Deck, Hiroko Hellier, Peter Hellier, Avis Rahm, Miriam Hickman, Becky Wilkins, Richard Cox, and Joseph Parisi. The Mendez family has made the Institute financially possible since 1993 by providing generous scholarships and budget support. Unlike the early years when we lost money on the Institute most of the time, the annual Mendez funding has kept the organization fiscally stable. We all owe them a huge debt of gratitude. The American economy during the past 20 years has made it very difficult for large ensembles to tour. Even smaller groups, such as brass quintets, have struggled to book enough concerts to remain full-time ensembles. Also, state, regional, and national grant foundations and arts councils have greatly reduced touring support due to less funding available. This is why Summit Brass has recently done very few concerts outside of its annual institutes. Another reason why booking tours has been difficult for us is that our single concert run-out fee is very high, generally between $20,000 and $25,000. To make our fee more reasonable, we need to have 6 concerts in a one-week tour, and in a regional area so that travel costs are minimal. In today's economy, presenters can book European chamber orchestras for the same fee as Summit Brass, because many chamber orchestras are willing to tour America if they are able to merely break even on expenses. We look forward to the day when touring can again be feasible. Meanwhile, we plan to continue holding the annual Rafael Mendez Brass Institute. Personnel in Summit Brass has evolved over the past 35 years, and it will continue to do so. Currently, Tom Bacon and Dan Parentoni are the only chartered members of Summit to remain active performers in the group, and several of the current members were once students of ours at the Keystone Brass Institute. It is our hope that Summit Brass will live on for another 100 years or more, maintaining the highest possible standard of brass playing and teaching possible in America. Now, just to reflect on a few of the many highlights Summit Brass has enjoyed over the past 35 years or so, I would like to mention the following. In 1998, trumpeter Stephen Glover donated to Summit Brass all of his research materials used for making editions to sell through the Brass Press publishing company. This included microfilm and paper copies of over 200 musical manuscripts of trumpet concertos and brass ensemble music by well-known Baroque and classical composers such as J.S. Bach, Leopold Mozart, Torelli, Telemann, Purcell, Haydn, Hummel, and dozens of others, as well as copies of numerous unpublished research papers, dissertations, out-of-print books, etc. A copy of each brass press publication was also included. Thus, the Stephen L. Glover Historical Brass Research Collection and the Brass Press Publications Archive was established and is housed along with the Summit Brass Music Library. Summit Brass has commissioned dozens of works, including original compositions by Michael Cave, Robert Elkier, Roger Calloway, Alan Vizzuti, Henri Lazaroff, David Sampson, Daniel Kessner, John Stevens, Manny Album, John Cheatham, Christopher Marshall, Michael Udow, Joshua Hobbs, and 6 works by Anthony Plogue. Summit also commissioned numerous arrangements from Ralph Sauer, Raymond Mace, Carl Topolo, David Hickman, Wayne Scott, Jeff Grass, Samuel Lancaster, Tony Kubas, Brian Burkle, Ronald Rahm, Tim Northcutt, Miriam Hickman, Joe Bergstaller, J.D. Shaw, and Michael Dougherty. Here are a few juicy quotes. Summit Brass was the feature of the national radio program St. Paul Sunday, hosted by Bill McLaughlin in 1986. In 1992, Summit Brass performed a live concert in St. Louis, which was recorded by a television station crew from Kansas City. Parts of the concert, plus interviews with several members of the ensemble, were edited into a 1-hour documentary on Summit Brass. The program was aired throughout Missouri several times. Some of our biggest concerts were held at the Hollywood Bowl, Alice Tully Hall in New York City, Fiddler's Green in Denver, Orchestra Hall in Chicago, and Red Rocks Amphitheater in Denver. Over the years, many excellent brass players have performed with Summit Brass as regular members, substitutes for tours, extras needed for recordings, or institute faculty. To date, here is a listing of paid players by different categories. In closing, I'll let the music speak for itself. Here is a live video of the conclusion of Wagner's Elsa's Procession to the Cathedral, performed in Denver by Summit Brass and the participants of the 2019 Rafael Mendez Brass Institute.